Technology. It's a thing that impacts many people's lives. Billions of people use mobile phones and computers every day. Two of the most popular companies that make technology like this are Apple and Microsoft. Apple and Microsoft have made many inventions that you will most likely recognize, such as Apple's iPhone and Microsoft's Windows.
Microsoft, a computer company led by Bill Gates, had a colossal conflict with Steve Jobs' Apple, a rival company. Gates invested $150 million in Apple in 1997. This investment saved both companies from falling deeper into debt. This investment is the best compromise in computer history.
Did you know that there was once a chance that Microsoft and Apple could have both gone bankrupt and potentially been dissolved? Microsoft was founded in April 1975 in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Bill Gates and Paul Allen. Then, 1 year later, Apple was created by Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne on April 1st, 1976 in Cupertino, California. Jobs and Gates weren't always enemies. Microsoft made software for the popular Apple II computer, but the two eventually grew out of the friendship and became enemies.
Microsoft started off by making accessories for other companies' computers. One of these was an operating system called the MS-DOS in 1981. Soon, they developed their very own personal computer. Later, they would create one of their most known products, the Windows. By the late 1980s, Microsoft became the most profitable computer company.
Likewise, Apple also rose to success in the computer industry. In April 1976, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne founded Apple, although Ronald Wayne left the company before they released any products. Jobs and Wozniak shared similar skills and interests when it came to technology.
Wozniak's coding and building skills, combined with Jobs' marketing expertise, helped Apple become a company that rose above many competitors. With a world-renowned products such as the Apple I and Apple II, Apple was at the top of its game in the late 70s and throughout the 80s.
As the company's popularity grew, the two became wary of each other. Apple and Microsoft soon became rivals in the industry. People were soon debating over whose technology was better.
As the rivalry grew, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs became enemies. In an interview that took place in a 1996 documentary, Steve Jobs said,
"The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste, and what that means is, I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way. They don't think of original ideas."
In fact, the rivalry grew so intense that Steve Jobs eventually accused Microsoft of stealing their user interface. Apple soon filed a lawsuit against Microsoft. In addition, Apple and Microsoft were in desperate need of money, so much so that Apple almost fell off the board. This scared both companies.
The companies were releasing more and more products, and even though these products were getting released, the companies were losing more and more money. According to Catherine Clifford from CNBC.com, Apple was in very serious trouble, said Jobs. And what was really clear was that if the game was a zero-sum game, where for Apple to win, Microsoft had to lose, then Apple was going to lose. End quote.
It wasn't just Apple that was in trouble, it was Microsoft too. Microsoft had been losing lots of money also, to the point where the company was going to keep falling deep into debt. Steve Jobs then decided to take action and proposed a deal to Microsoft CEO Bill Gates. In the biography Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, the author recalls this proposal. Steve Jobs told Gates, quote, "All I need is a commitment that Microsoft will keep developing for the Mac and an investment by Microsoft and Apple so it has a stake in our success." End quote.
In 1997, Microsoft and Apple agreed to a deal that would change the course of technology forever. Apple proposed a deal to Microsoft to invest $150 million, which got them out of the debt Apple was stuck in. Apple also agreed to drop the lawsuit, which accused Microsoft of stealing Apple's user interface.
The two biggest technology companies were now, instead of enemies, partners in business. Even though Microsoft may have strengthened its biggest competitor, it was a great new business opportunity. As for Apple, if they kept selling products as they were, they now would have the money to take them further out of debt.
On August 6, 1997, Steve Jobs hosted the event Macworld 1997. At one point in the conference, a few words were projected onto the screen where he released information about the deal. When it was announced, the audience booed Gates because they did not understand why the deal was done. A rival donating $150 million to their main rival to save them from debt just did not make sense to the audience.
In a remarkable feat of negotiating ledger domain, Apple co-founder Steve Jobs got needed cash in return for non-voting shares and an assurance that Microsoft would support Office for the Mac for 5 years, said John C. Abel at Wired.com. Steve Jobs, using his bright mind, got a deal that would save his company while saving Microsoft at the same time. What the two did not know was that this would change history forever.
People outside of the deal were shocked. According to CNBC.com, even in cyberspace, the moment can only be described as surreal, a New York Times opinion section wrote in the wake of the deal. End quote. Other companies were shocked by this spontaneous agreement between the once enemies of their own industry.
This news immediately broke the headlines. Time magazine immediately published an issue with the deal as the cover story. In an interview with Jobs, the Apple founder said, quote, "What if Apple didn't exist? Think about it. Time wouldn't get published next week. Some 70% of the newspapers in the US wouldn't publish tomorrow morning. Some 60% of the kids wouldn't have computers. 64% of the teachers wouldn't have computers. More than half the websites created on Macs wouldn't exist. So there's something worth saving here. See?" Quote.
Microsoft and Apple were now back in the game. They kept releasing their products and making more and more money. The two companies were getting very wealthy, and they had a period of harmony. People were still shocked from the deal, as it seemed unimaginable. Some people still did not understand why Microsoft would agree to this deal. People were struggling to accept that these two companies would not be dire enemies. As reported at the time by the Seattle Times, quote, "The unexpected revelation prompted gasps of disbelief and loud boos from the audience of thousands of Mac users and software developers." End quote.
As for the lawsuit being dropped, Microsoft was ecstatic. They had been fighting for years on end, trying to get the lawsuit dropped. They could use the look and feel they wanted with their software without Apple saying it was taken from them. They got the right to create their software how they wanted back, and took advantage of it by making various products that sold well.
Years after this deal, both companies are still thriving. Some of the products from Apple selling well today are the various iPhones, iPads, MacBooks, Apple TVs, and more. Microsoft also has products flourishing such as the Xbox, Surface Pro, Windows, and a series of tablets and computers.
Apple is now the 9th largest company by revenue in the world, according to CBS.com. According to Fortune, Apple is ranked number 3 in top US companies, behind Berkshire Hathaway and Walmart. Apple's revenue from 2016 is $215.6 billion, and Apple's profit from 2016 is $45.7 billion.
The iPhone by Apple is easily one of the most recognized smartphone brands on the market, and new iPhones are consistently being made, with 3 models released in 2017 alone. One of these is the iPhone X, one of the most advanced smartphones available. This could have never been released if it wasn't for the deal of 1997.
Microsoft has also been doing exceptionally well since the deal. It is ranked 28th in the US according to Fortune. It has released a steady line of computers and gaming systems such as the Xbox and the Surface Pro. There has also been 5 different editions of the Xbox, including the Xbox One X that was released last year, and 4 versions of the Surface Pro.
Long after this deal, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates became friends. The rivalry was not as intense as it once was. After Steve Jobs' death in 2011, Bill Gates reflected on the friendship. According to telegraph.co.uk, Bill Gates, quote, told Steve about how he should feel great about what he had done during the company he had built in the Apple founders' final moments. Even though these founders were once bitter rivals, they were able to put their differences aside and make the world's technology a better place.
In conclusion, Steve Jobs, with co-owner Steve Wozniak, and Bill Gates were both owners of huge companies in the computer industry, Apple and Microsoft. Many owners as big as them were enemies with each other. Apple and Microsoft had been losing some money before the investment. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates came to a compromise that helped both of the companies. Bill Gates invested $150 million in Apple, and if they didn't find this agreement, both companies could have fallen deeper into debt.
The era of setting this up as a competition between Apple and Microsoft is over as far as I'm concerned.